So if the product does not get delivered on time, it's not usable. It gets damaged right away. So the amount of waste that creates from a financial standpoint, from just a overall supply chain standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, it's a lot. So the challenge is, how do you focus on creating an amazing brand? How do you focus on creating amazing marketing, but at the same time deliver on that promise that you're selling to your customers so that they can enjoy your products?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Juan. Juan, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, Tom, thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here. So, Juan Meisel, founder and CEO at Grip.
Okay, and for people who are unaware, Juan, what is GRIP?
So, at Grip, we create technology and provide fulfillment and shipping services for direct to consumer companies that are shipping perishable products. So, that can be companies that are shipping human grade pet food, ready to eat meals, groceries, specialty products, pharma, probiotics, so a wide range of products, but everything that it's either frozen or refrigerated.
Okay, and what is it you're doing for them?
So we do technology, fulfillment, and logistics services. So at Grip, we now have 5 fulfillment facilities across the country, one in New Jersey, one in Florida, Michigan, Texas, California. And we get to more than 75% of the country in 24 hours and the rest in just 48. So we're the fastest company out there that's handling these specific type of products. And the way that we have developed the platform and the services is me and Jimmy Cooper, our CTO. We both come from the background of what we call the problem. So we both were super early on in a company called ButcherBox, which a lot of now, where you're used to ship frozen meat in the mail. And essentially, with the issues that we have in developing and creating that supply chain, is what we have now brought into Grip, and it's how we have developed the platform for our customers.
Okay, and your time at ButcherBox sounds like a masterclass in scaling operations. What were the biggest supply chain challenges you faced in those early days, and how did you overcome them?
So, I mean, early on at ButcherBox, when we were getting started, it was all about how do we get people to buy a box of frozen meat in the mail? Not even ship it, not even deliver it. I'm talking a decade ago. So, hey,
Right.
how do we actually get people to understand that they can buy a box of frozen meat and it gets delivered to their houses? So it's mostly a marketing, a communication problem
Mm.
where, after the first year, we grew so fast because we work with very influential people in the food space that help us overcome that block and or that challenge of people understanding that they can actually do it. And we grew so fast that our marketing and messaging problems actually became logistics and fulfillment and supply chain problems, because we now figure out that all the thousands of boxes that we were selling, we now had to deliver. And now, you're not talking about a box that contains, a t-shirt or shoes or, even a laptop that if you get one day late, you can still wear, you can still use it. Sure, it's not the best customer experience, but you can still use it. The actual product is not damaged.
Yeah.
At ButcherBox and other companies and our amazing customers, it's much different. So if the product does not get delivered on time, it's not usable. It gets damaged right away. So the amount of waste that creates from a financial standpoint, from just a overall supply chain standpoint, from a sustainability standpoint, it's a lot. So the challenge is, how do you focus on creating an amazing brand? How do you focus on creating amazing marketing, but at the same time deliver on that promise that you're selling to your customers so that they can enjoy your products? So at ButcherBox, after we scaled exponentially, we started having a lot of issues where we were getting, products were thawed, we were paying way too much for fulfillment and shipping. We didn't have the right technology to dynamically understand how were we supposed to be shipping those boxes.
Mm.
So what we were essentially forced to do is trying to patch all that together internally and hire engineers and just try to get creative about it. But at the end of the day, we were not really a supply chain or a logistics or a fulfillment company. We were, an awesome brand that procures some of the best meat in the world and, has a beautiful point of sale system. So those were some of the challenges that we were facing is, hey, how do we keep doing that and spending our resources where it matter the most while still being able to provide an amazing, delivery and logistics experience to our customers?
Okay. And what were the issues that you came across while there that you said, hmm, maybe I should set up my own company solving these issues for other companies?
I mean, on like very specific issues you're dealing with, it's been some of the worst nights I've had is if you have 1,000 boxes going to California and there's a wildfire and you don't know about it in time, or you maybe know about it and it's in the back of your head, but you don't actually have the systems to react dynamically to it and say, okay, these boxes that are going to this region of California, I'm going to proactively hold and let the customer know. Then all of a sudden you have $100,000 on the road of boxes that you already pre-packed, you already have added refrigerant like dry ice or gel packs to, and it's boxes and meat in this case that it's outside of a controlled environment. So the clock is ticking. Like at the time that you add the box to a truck, the clock is ticking.
Hmm.
So, just multiple issues like that where we just didn't catch events in time, where maybe we also had heat waves and we didn't add the amount of refrigerant that we were supposed to, or maybe the final mile carrier was not performing, at good rates, but we still kept shipping boxes with that same supplier or that same carrier to the same zip codes, even though if we looked at the data, we knew that it was going to fail. So it was just how much we were forced to do all these things manually and
Mhm.
not having the right systems in place. And then at the same time, I actually had a good amount of companies, like very, very well recognized brands, reach out to me a few years ago and say, hey, Juan, I see that you guys have been able to scale ButcherBox to a certain point. Like, how are you guys actually doing this? Because I'm not profitable. I'm losing money every time I ship a box. My thaw or damage rate is anywhere from 2 to 4%, which means that all those boxes that you're getting shipped in the mail, a lot of them are just getting damaged, and you're hurting that lifetime value experience of your customer. So just by matching my personal experience of, hey, we don't actually have the right tools to do this, even though we're a $500 million company already, and then we have all these companies reach out to me and say, hey, how are you actually doing this? Then that's when essentially about 3 years ago it clicked for me, and we said, hey, there needs to be someone solving this. Like there's really no one like head down solving these supply chain issues for companies that ship frozen and refrigerated items in the mail. And part of the reason why I think that that had not happened before, it's because this is a relatively new market that has grown exponentially over the last decade or so.
Sure.
But when you compare the perishable shipping market versus the regular e-commerce, regular e-commerce has been around for, let's call it 30, 35 years now. And it's been exponentially growing since then. So you've had a lot more time for all this technology and all these companies to develop. And then also the solutions are much, much simpler. So you don't actually need to come from the problem, as we call it, to develop a solution that ships t-shirts or shoes in the mail. But you do have to come from the problem to develop a solution that ships food or pharma in the mail because of how many variables and how specific the decision making needs to be. We're essentially one of the first classes to graduate from the problem and just going head down and building a solution for this.
Nice. Nice. And you're using AI to predict climate disruptions. Can you walk us through maybe a real life example of how your technology helped mitigate some kind of potential shipping disaster?
Yeah, of course, and it's actually a very similar example that I just went through that happened this last week. So there's a wildfire going on in California right now in the Malibu region called the Franklin Fire. It's been mostly contained. It's about 54% contained, to this point. But we proactively held boxes that were going to that wildfire. So a lot of our customers offer subscription offerings to their customers.
Right.
So that means that they buy once and then every single time, let's call it, next month, the subscription just recurs. So it's not like someone is proactively going to the website and placing the order and thinking that their box is going to be delivered to a wildfire. It's someone that might have subscribed, a year ago or 6 months ago, and their box is just running on, on a recurring basis. So
Mm.
Before shipping all these boxes, our system essentially checks every single zip code, every single major weather event that could be going on in the country, and then it matches that to all the orders that we have in our system, and then it proactively, like, essentially understands the gravity of the event, and then puts the orders on hold. So we held hundreds of orders going to California last week, specifically because there was a wildfire around the Malibu region. So that's like a one specific example on how we're using the technology and how fast we can do these things. But that's essentially a one-to-one to, hey, let's not throw product out. Let's, improve the sustainability of the supply chain by not having to then reship all these boxes. And then also let's keep the customer happy. Because if you're dealing with a wildfire, the last thing that you want to know is that you have $200 worth of steaks being delivered to your house because you're not even there.
Yeah. 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 And you don't want to come back to a barbecue.
Yep.
And what about things like waste reduction? Packing waste is a huge issue in e-commerce. How can companies kind of strike a balance between product protection and sustainability while still meeting customer expectations?
It's a very fine line that the only real way to dance around that line and being profitable is introducing technology to it, because there's no single human being that can dynamically make all these decisions to thousands of boxes and thousands of orders before they ship, and be efficient about it. So I'll give you a few examples. One of them is, if you're shipping in box to, let's say, the Chicago market, and your carrier is delivering at 99.5% on time delivery, and the temperatures outside are, minus 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's a 2-day time in transit, like, you don't need 10 pounds of ice in that box. Just
Mhm.
scale back and just add 5 pounds of ice to that box. So you have saved a couple dollars in the dry ice. You have saved space inside the box that you can then go down on a different box size. And then you have also now saved on, the shipping costs, and then also brought down CO2 emissions of something, not shipping something that you didn't necessarily have to ship. So that's on the side of, hey, let's scale back and let's make this box more profitable and let's reduce waste on that front. But
Mhm.
then if you think about on the other front, if you're shipping a box to Texas and it's the middle of the summer and it's 110 degrees in Texas, and this box is, let's call it a 1-day time in transit, which means it takes 24 hours to get to the customer, and the carrier could be performing well, but you might have to that one specific box not add just 5 pounds. You might have to go up and add 10 pounds to that box, and that's much less waste, and that's a much better experience than just adding 5 pounds to that box and having that box being damaged, because then you just, essentially damage, let's say, 10 to 20 pounds of food that you were shipping, and then that customer is going to lose trust in your company, and then you also
Yeah.
have to reship that box, so that's more waste created there. So that's why I say it's a fine line, because it can just go both ways depending on where that box is shipping from and where that box is shipping to, and that's where you need technology to be able to adjust to those dynamic decisions. It's much easier if you're just shipping boxes to, one city, let's call it,
Yes.
even though you probably still need some technology to do it. But there's around 50,000 zip codes in the US, and it's just not possible to do it without technology. But it's a very fine line that you can definitely dance around.
And what about the idea of using regional carriers as opposed to national ones? Uh, what's the case for partnering with them? Is there a case for partnering with them? Does it have an impact on sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So the the idea behind this is, you know, partner with companies and use services where they perform the best. So there's not a single service or a single company where you can say, hey, they are the best at every single zip code and every single region of the country. It's just not true, because they are dealing with physical assets, and those assets are placed in different regions of the country. And
Mhm.
then those assets also have, or those buildings also have, different labor components that some companies might be better at managing than others. Or then also they have some different vehicle or model components that some companies might be better managing than others, depending on the region and the specific zip code of where that box is going. So for that reason, what we do is we just choose the best from all the different providers out there. And that includes national carriers like FedEx and UPS. And that also includes a bunch of different regional carriers and much smaller companies depending on where the box is going. So we have, millions of shipments that have flown through our network, and based on that, we know what building and what route every single box is going to go through. And then based on that, we analyze our options based on performance and cost. And that's how we dynamically, every single time we're going to ship a box, we choose the best supplier that we can send this one box with.
And if we look at the e-commerce boom that you talked about earlier, it's obviously not slowing down, the opposite, it's building up, particularly in perishables. So, what unique supply chain challenges does this space face that non perishable shippers might not even think about?
So one of the challenges is understanding how you can adapt the operation on the ground to what software and machines say. There's definitely a lot of room for there to be a disconnect between both worlds,
Hmm.
because with a piece of software, as long as you develop it correctly, you can make very specific decisions of how to ship a box, and you can be very dynamic about it. But if you don't have that same flexibility on the ground, then you're just going to have a disconnect where you're not going to be able to get to the level of sophistication that you need. And that's actually one of the main reasons why we decided a few years ago to go and open our own fulfillment operations, because the software's nice, and it definitely has improvements for the performance of the boxes and the customers. But where the magic really happens is when you match both, and where you say, okay, I'm structuring my supply chain and the operation on the ground to match the capabilities that I have on the software side. And then you do the opposite as well, to where you have a very good relationship between both worlds. And that's where the magic happens. That's where you can see a lot of the improvements in the supply chain.
This whole sector, I'm guessing it's quite seasonal, with peak seasons and troughs. So, what are some key strategies brands should adopt to survive peak seasonality while staying sustainable as well?
So it's pretty interesting, because I wouldn't necessarily call it seasonal from a demand perspective. There's definitely
Okay.
some brands that experience seasonality, but when you look at the market as a whole, there's a lot of these companies and products are running on subscriptions, and others are things that people use quite often either way. So a
Okay.
good amount of the market is not seasonal. There are some companies that I would call more seasonal, that are maybe in the gifting space, but other than that, I think there is a pretty well established growing demand through the year instead. So from a demand perspective, not too seasonal. But that being said, the challenging part with this is that the rest of the market is very seasonal, with the peak season and with Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and the holidays and Christmas, and people just buying stuff in the mail.
Hmm.
And we, as a market, or as a specific subsegment of the market, we're using a lot of the same infrastructure from a logistics standpoint. So we're essentially sharing the resources with other companies that are 2xing, 3xing the volume and the demand. And
Sure.
we, as a submarket, we just have to learn and use technology to be able to adapt to that condition. So, as an example, if we know that the week after Thanksgiving, so the week of Cyber Monday, we're seeing specific, demand increases or specific behaviors in the logistics depending on where the box is going, we can adapt to those by being more conservative with the boxes, by adding more refrigerant, or by even maybe holding some of the boxes that we can hold that week and shipping the next week if the final customer is fine with that. And that way we are using the data, we're using the technology to be much more proactive and understand that, hey, even though we as a market might not have a 3x or a 2x peak season, we're sharing the same resources from a logistics standpoint. So we need to use data to be able to understand what the impact of that is in the market, and how do we plan around it.
And if we look, I don't know, let's say 5 or 10 years down the line, what role do you see AI and technology playing in shaping more sustainable and efficient supply chains?
Being able to make decisions much more informed and much faster. I think we're only getting started with using the variables to be dynamic, to improve the performance of the boxes, to reduce cost, to reduce the environmental impact that we have. But I think that AI and the data processing capabilities are going to get us much, much better as an industry to just involve different metrics that or different variables that we weren't even thinking about 5 years ago or to this date. I think that we're going to be able to process data much, much faster, and that's going to make everything much more dynamic.
Great. Look forward to that. And speaking of environmental factors, climate resilience is on everyone's radar, but we often hear it as more of a buzzword. In your experience, what does it really mean for supply chains to be climate resilient?
I think it goes back to the data and being able to react to it on a proactive basis instead of on a reactive basis after the fact. There's amazing forecasts out there with a lot of data collection that includes the major weather event that we were just talking about, but that also includes different temperature swings and different humidity swings or precipitation swings across the country, and they vary tremendously. If you have a
Mm.
heat wave and that just happened to affect 3 days of next week, but you already know that today, then the question is how can you plan for that if you know for that today, or if you know there's going to be a blizzard in the Rockies or in the famous Donner's Pass from Nevada into California. How are you planning for that today? If you're shipping boxes from California onto to the east, let's say from California into Nevada or Utah, then that's just going to impact majority of the orders that are going that way. Or on the other side, if you're shipping boxes from Utah and you have to get into California and you can't actually get through Donner's Pass next week because there's going to be a blizzard there, it's a question of, hey, how are you proactively planning for this? And every single day, there's much more accurate data out there that companies can use, but you just need to be able to adapt like your team to it, your operation to it, and the actual building on the ground as well.
Okay. Do you ever get conflicting forecasts? Like, one data service says Donner Pass will be closed next week due to snow, and the other says, no, it'll be wide open.
We do, of course, and although it's getting at more accurate and you have more data sources that you can compare, it happens to all of us, right? Sometimes you go to your weather app on your phone and it says it's going to rain in 2 hours, and then you go out and it's sunny and sunshine. So we try to always compare the different data sources and then use the knowledge of our logistics team to make decisions, and then also compare that to the past, because the past is also a lot of times a very good indicator of how the different events impact the boxes. So as an
Right.
example, we see certain type of blizzards, depending on the inches of precipitation, could make the probability of a box being delayed being 10x versus it not being a blizzard. So we understand that, then we can essentially plan for the worst in most scenarios, and we can essentially be on the conservative side and say, hey, there's an 80% chance for this blizzard to happen, and we're just going to play with that 80% chance. We're not going to go on the other 20% chance. We're again shipping t-shirts or shoes in the mail, maybe we just go with the 20% chance. But in this case, there's so much at stake. There's like these boxes have such a high average order value, and also the importance of the products being delivered are so high, because people are usually going to either feed their families with what's been delivered, or it's a very thoughtful gift, or it's something that they need for their daily lives. If you're talking about a ready to eat, frozen meal, or if you're talking about the farmer product. So the stakes of what's being delivered is so high that you want to be within the 80% of the conservative side and not the 20%.
Sure, sure. I'm curious, what's the most surprising or unusual shipment Grip has ever managed? And do you have any fun stories about perishables that we wouldn't expect?
It's a good question. I mean, in ButcherBox times, we have definitely shipped boxes with hundreds of packs of bacon before. People that just have a pretty big love for bacon, to the point where we had to do like multiple boxes of bacon going to the same address, and that bacon, it's great. I don't know who would buy so much. So I think that's definitely one that we were very intrigued about.
Okay, very good. For any brands listening who are just starting to think about reducing their logistics footprint, what's one practical step they should take today?
I think the first thing is see where your customer base is so that you can get closer to them in bulk. So the way to reduce your footprint is you get as close as you can in bulk to your customers. And that way the parcel or like the one box singular shipment has a much shorter distance that it has to travel. And that always has the biggest footprint, the biggest cost. And that's why we've opened the facilities in the places that we have, essentially looking at data and seeing, okay, where are our boxes going? Like, where are our customers ordering from? And
Right.
can we get as close as we can with inventory in bulk to where they are so that we reduce the distance of the actual parcel or the single box delivery? So I would say, start by seeing where your customers are, start by seeing where your products are going, and just try to get as close as you can to them. There's of course the challenge that you don't want to distribute your inventory too thin because then the cost of carrying your inventory is it's too big. So there's definitely some math that you can do to understand if it makes sense for you to be in one building versus two versus three versus maybe all the way to five. But that's just some math that you can do to figure those numbers out.
And what would be, do you think, some misconceptions that companies have about making their supply chains greener, and how would you debunk those myths?
I think one is companies trying to be very consistent about how they ship boxes could be a misconception because I think it should be the complete opposite. You should introduce as much variability as you can. Of course, there is, the whole equation of diminishing returns where, for example, if you're shipping with just one box size and you're trying to be consistent with it and you're trying to say, okay, I'm going to get, more economies of scale by just shipping with one box size, then you might actually, like cut the cost and cut the amount of air that you're shipping by half if you go to two or three box sizes. And that's awesome, but of course, you shouldn't go to 10 or 20 box sizes to try to solve for every single instance of it because you're just going to go into diminishing returns. So I think the misconception there is that one, just being consistent with how you ship boxes is not necessarily always the best, and that there's some variability that you can introduce to the equation to essentially get the best of both worlds.
And what excites you most about the future of sustainable supply chains? Are there any emerging trends or technologies that you think would be game changers?
I mean, all of it. I think I'm an eternal optimist by nature, but I think the capabilities of processing data with the different AI models that have been developed over the last 5 years or so are going to change the and have a massive impact on the way that people manage supply chain because everyone is just going to be able to make much more informed decisions, and that goes everywhere from like, hey, think about the different variables that go into buying a car or the different variables to go into buying your house. There's so many variables that can go into that you as a person might not have the capability of one identifying them all, but two, like doing all the analysis required to then make your most informed decision on those like big purchases that you do as a human being.
Mhm.
Where I think it's the same on a supply chain standpoint, where there might be data points as I was seeing before that you're not even tracking right now that could have a massive impact on the footprint and how you ship your boxes. And then also the capability of the system that you have of processing them all. That's all just going up and to the right in terms of the amount of variables and how fast you can process and make decisions. So I'm very excited about that because that's only going to improve from here on.
Great, great. And if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the supply chain industry overnight, what would it be?
Reducing waste. There's still so much waste out there by just companies and supply chains not adapting fast enough. That's the one thing that if you ask me, hey, you can do it like in the next hour and just eliminate completely the waste, I'll do it because like waste is waste, right? It's just not benefiting anyone.
Yeah.
Maybe it could benefit on a short term, as an example, like the company that you buy boxes from. If you're buying boxes that are like much bigger than what you need, yeah, sure, that box might be, might see an increase in revenue in the short term. Or that box company might see an increase in revenue in the short term, but in the long term, their customer is just spending much more money than they should, and then they're being less profitable than they should, and then they're creating more waste than they should. So the long term is not going to be good for that company, which means it's not going to be good for the partner or the supplier out the boxes. So I think waste might create, some short term gains for some companies, but it's not what, long term a sustainable supply chain where everyone wins looks like.
Cool. A left field question. If you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a spokesperson for sustainable supply chains, who would it be and why?
It's a good question. And this is, I think, also going to be left field answer, but I would actually have it be some type of AI model that we can give a
Mhm.
name to.
Okay.
Because again, what I was saying before is that I don't think no human being is able to analyze all the variables and all the metrics that you have to actually put into all these models or into all the thought processing to make the best decisions for sustainability. There's some things where you can think about short-term wins of sustainability that might actually have a long-term negative impact, or the other
Mhm.
way around as well. You might think about some long-term positive impacts of sustainability, but that they're not economically feasible right now, so people just don't adapt them and you just don't end up making an impact. So we can have some type of supercomputer AI model that just takes all these variables and actually comes up with the answer that is going to create or have the biggest impact on sustainability. Right now, I think I would just go with that, and we can give them whatever name you can think of.
As long as it's not Hal.
There you go.
Cool. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Juan. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
No, I think you've asked the right questions. When I think about sustainable supply chains, I always keep going back to the unit economic and the financial incentives behind it,
Right.
because for things to be sustainable in the future, they just need to make sense economically,
Mm.
because that's how the world works, and that's how financial incentives and people and companies work. So I definitely encourage people and companies to think about when they're trying to push for sustainability, how can that also be economically feasible in today's world, so that people can actually get behind the idea and corporations can get behind those ideas, so that they end up just doing stuff for the greater good of humanity.
One that's been really interesting. If people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Juan Meisel, or Twitter. I'm not that active there, but I'm trying to be. Share some more of my thoughts there. Or then you can also go to our website if you're interested in our company, gripshipping.com. But yeah, feel free to send me a message, or yeah, follow me on LinkedIn.
Juan, that's been fascinating. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.